Resident Evil 4 Remake finally launches in about a week or so, and honestly, it just feels surreal. I have been looking forward to it with cautious optimism, given that the original is still my favorite Resident Evil game. I have played the hell out of the Chainsaw demo, and I've learned a lot about what to expect from the upcoming game. I came away with some really positive feelings, but also with some small concerns I did not have before. Let's take a look at it. So starting off with graphics, I tested Resident Evil 4 on both PS4 Pro and PS5. It looks and performs great on both systems, although there is a noticeable difference. Resident Evil Village from a couple years ago looked almost identical on both platforms, but there's a slightly bigger gap when it comes to Resident Evil 4. The last gen port has more noticeable texture pop-in, dips in frame rates, and even some of the extra bells and whistles are absent in the settings menu, but it's by no means unplayable on the PlayStation 4. It's actually pretty impressive how well optimized it is given we're already 3 years into the new console generation. I think it's safe to say that this will be the last Resident Evil game to support last gen, but if you have a PS4 and do not wish to make the jump to PS5, you don't have much to worry about here. For some context, Resident Evil 7, Village, and the remakes of 2 and 3 are all some of the best looking and best performing games on the PlayStation 4, and it seems Resident Evil 4 won't be all that different, honestly. Moving on to the PS5 version, it looks noticeably better, but not by that huge of a margin. I find it interesting that between the 3 new survival horror titles, Callisto Protocol, Dead Space, and Resident Evil 4, this game feels the least graphically impressive. The gore and dismemberment especially falls a bit behind the other 2 titles, but at least it's still a drastic improvement over the original RE4. As for the lighting and art direction, it looks drop-dead gorgeous. The environments are wonderfully detailed and feel more lived in than ever before. The presentation looks a lot busier than the original, and so far it seems like a massive improvement. The game looks phenomenal in motion, but some problems rear their ugly heads when you go into photo mode. This feature was introduced in Village, but it was pretty bare bones. Resident Evil 4 will be the first one to take full advantage of this feature, and I've no doubt I'll waste way too much time with it in the full game. Unfortunately, I'm a bit underwhelmed by the graphical detail on Leon's character model. It's an issue I had with Resident Evil 3, and it's made its way to Resident Evil 4, and that's the fact that the eyes in the in-game models look a little bit lifeless. In photo mode you can see that Leon's eyelids look way too brightly lit, and it just makes him look dead inside. It also makes finding the perfect angle for the lighting more complicated than it needs to be, and it gets especially egregious in dark areas like the hunter's basement, where everything is pitch black but all you see is a flashlight and a floating pair of eyelids. The hair strand option in the menu is also a weird addition. You get to choose between the default hairstyle option we've seen in all the trailers and another option to render Leon's hair strands individually, and I'm a little bit mixed on this one. The hair itself doesn't look bad at all in this mode, but the lighting seems a little bit off. The hair shines way too bright and distinctly compared to the rest of the character model and the environments, and it just sticks out like a sore thumb. What's funny is that this hair setting actually looks really good for photo mode. Unless you're planning on taking lots of screenshots, it's best to keep the hairstyle on the default setting. Controls-wise, Resident Evil 4 plays surprisingly fast for how much slower it looks than the original. It plays like a mix between Resident Evil 2, Resident Evil 3, and even Village, but with some extremely welcome improvements. For starters, the controls of the original have been completely overhauled, which I'm sure the majority will be happy with that change. That means no more tank controls. Leon feels a lot less snappier to control, but the movement feels weightier and more fluid, which I think is going to feel like a fair trade-off the more I get used to it. The full 360 movement feels a lot more intuitive, and I really like how Leon shifts his weight as he meanders left and right as he's running past the enemies. The updated Resident Evil 4 has now added a crouch button which works similar to the one in Revelations 2, but here it's not just used for stealth. If you start running and hit the crouch button, you can duck underneath incoming attacks, even with the absence of a split-second dodge prompt, which will be in the full game. It works especially well on empty-handed Ganados and even the enhanced mutated versions that come lunging at you. Another highly welcome addition is quick swapping. The Tetris-style inventory never got old in the original, but having to pause the game to swap weapons every single time feels like a little bit of a drag these these days. Here the inventory management feels much more seamless and intuitive, allowing you to switch up to 8 different weapons on the fly. I really wish there was a button to heal during combat though, or at least to assign a healing item to one of the shortcuts. The biggest change and addition by far is the new parrying system. Leon still wields the knife using L1 or the left bumper, but now the knife is more versatile and fragile at the same time. You could parry pretty much anything with a pointy end, and even slice off arms if a Ganado tries to land a punch on you. You can even parry the chainsaw. It can make the knife feel a bit too overpowered, but with how relentless the Ganados are this time around, I'd rather have it and not use it than to need it and not have it. The remake has also simplified ground finishers. Instead of slowly aiming down at the ground and slashing away with the knife, the remake gives you a prompt to finish them off with a single fatal blow. These one-hit kills can also be activated during stealth or after throwing a flash grenade. A perfectly timed parry will also cause a Ganado to turn around, leaving them open for an instant finisher. Obviously the finishers and the parries will chip away at the knife a lot faster, but it also makes the combat flow more naturally. Even with all the new additions, you can still use the knife the same way you used to in the original. Holding L1 and pressing R2 lets out a narrow but deadly pierce, which up to this point used to be the signature move for Jill Valentine, and pressing R2 while not aiming lets out a horizontal slash similar to the one in Revelations 2. This move is actually faster and more efficient at breaking boxes than it is to kick them, and it does not affect durability. The weapon's sound effects are another step forward in the right direction. Capcom seems to have done a superb job making the weapons feel extremely powerful without actually making them more powerful. In fact, I think they're much less effective now. Popping off headshots and kneecaps is a lot harder to pull off in the remake, at least with a controller, but sound effects are great, and this game addresses a gripe I had with Village, and that's the feedback loop of the gameplay. The handguns sound and feel like they actually do something now, and the enemies stagger a lot more. Surprisingly, even the dismemberment is drastically improved, adding to the responsiveness. The gunplay just feels so much more satisfying here. The melee moves have been improved as well. Leon's kick doesn't hit as many enemies at once as it used to, but it feels extremely powerful and the animation quality has been significantly improved. You can even do a suplex right off the bat, whereas in the original it only became accessible in the castle section. Good luck surviving that. One animation I didn't like is the way Leon jumps through windows. It feels unnatural, almost like he's being magnetized towards the window instead of using actual momentum to jump. I know it's a nitpick, but it feels incredibly distracting. One more thing I didn't like about the demo is how it keeps resetting where I map the shortcuts for the weapon slots. Personally, I like switching to my handguns with the left arrow and shotguns with the right, but it insists on keeping the handgun assigned to the up arrow and shotguns to the down arrow. I really hope this won't be a problem in the full game. A cool little detail I enjoyed is the improved level of physics. Enemies seem to collide properly with the environment as they fall down, and a lot of objects they collide with seem to be fully destructible. This might explain why the PS4 version of RE4 runs slightly worse than RE8 did. In the end, the demo is almost exactly what I expected it to be. I wouldn't say it exceeded my expectations, but so far, it has met them. There are two things that I genuinely expected from this remake before I even started the demo, but was still a bit disappointed to see. The first one is that chainsaw death. It feels as if the last few Resident Evil games have toned down the violent death scenes, and while I'm aware that might come across as sounding a bit sadistic, the brutality of the death scenes plays a major role in how much the horror can actually be effective. If the consequence isn't convincingly horrific, then what's really there to be scared of? I want to make it clear, I'm not saying the remake isn't brutal, it most definitely is, and I actually like the new death scenes they've added, derivative as they are. My issue mostly stems from the lack of polish that puts the brutality down a few notches, from feeling absolutely horrifying to feeling needlessly drawn out. I'm pretty sure Nick Apostolidis is back as the voice of Leon, and he does an excellent job here as always. There's a different flavor to his version of Leon compared to Paul Mercier's, but he has completely nailed the sounds of agony in the death scenes. I just wish the presentation was on par with the sound. Let me give some examples. The new chainsaw death rips Leon in half, and yet no visible change can be seen apart from how the jacket gets torn and bloodied. For a guy who got literally split in half, he's really keeping it together, isn't he? Another death scene has Leon getting his eyes obliterated, and even though he screams like it, the facial animations do not match the severity of the death scene at all. There's even another death scene in this demo alone where he gets his skull pierced by a mutated Ganado tentacle, and yet, even though he clearly has visible signs on the back of his head getting absolutely demolished, there's no sign of the tentacle piercing at all from the front. Listen, I know these are very minute details and they might not even matter in the end, but it's little details like this that made the original RE4 the benchmark of horror games, action games, video games in general for so many years to begin with. There are so many people out there who are convinced that Resident Evil 4 is when Resident Evil stopped being a horror game, and yet the death scenes of this game alone have more horror than most horror games. There are so many parts you can change to the formula while still keeping Resident Evil 4's identity intact, as the demo has so excellently demonstrated. But I don't think the horror of the original death scenes is one of them. Most of my complaints in this video have been a me problem so far rather than actual flaws with the game, which is really good, but this is one of the few complaints that I am genuinely concerned about having a long-term negative impact on the game's legacy. Given all the evidence from the sloppy rain effects of last month's gameplay reveal all the way up to here with the demo, I'm still concerned about whether the game is being rushed to meet the release date, and so because of that, I'm still cautiously optimistic rather than hyped. The second thing I found to be disappointing is the secret hard mode, Mad Chainsaw mode. The last few Resident Evil games have handled extreme difficulties really poorly in my opinion, and they're more designed around powerful unlockable weapons to combat the RNG and bullet sponge enemies rather than relying on actual skill and proper balancing. The Mad Chainsaw mode is supposed to be exclusive to the demo, but I think it paints a clear enough picture as to what to expect from the full game, and I can't say I'm looking forward to those harder difficulties. On a more positive note, it seems exclusive upgrades are back, so at least that's gonna make the difficult runs a lot more exciting. With all of this said, I've been having a blast with this demo. I have lost count on how many times I've played it at this point, which is a really good sign. It's possible that the demo is an old build from many months ago and that all of these concerns will be non-existent in the full game. I'm also positive that I'll have an amazing time when the full game comes out, regardless of whether the remake will actually surpass the original or not. The funny thing about Resident Evil 4 is that it's such a top-tier game that even a game that's only half as good as it would still be a really damn good game. But I don't think we're looking at a game that's only half as good here. Maybe it won't be the most faithful remake ever like Dead Space was, but the new Resident Evil 4 has a shot at being a reimagining that actually surpasses the original. I can't believe I'm actually saying that. I've got a good feeling about this one. I think there are some great surprises left to unpack here. We could be getting something really special with Resident Evil 4 Remake, and if we're lucky, it might even end up being the best Resident Evil game again. At least I hope so. If this will not outdo the original Resident Evil 4 after all these years, then nothing will.
Case closed.
I'd like to thank you for tuning in. Be sure to look forward to my Resident Evil 4 Remake review by subscribing and hitting the bell to be the first to know when it goes up. And if you're interested, you can check out my review of the original Resident Evil 4 right here. And with that, the Raven draws to a conclusion. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.